Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story. A federal court sentenced a businessman to 20 months in custody and a $5 million penalty. The reason being a key player in extending China's transnational suppression on U.S. soil, all while hiding his role as a China agent from the Justice Department. A massive funding cut for global media outlets backed by the U.S. government, including Voice of America and Radio Free Asia. Could the move be a boon for the Chinese Communist Party, or is there more at play? As for cuts to Voice of America, the new special advisor to the United States Agency for Global Media shared a strong message.
A 15-year lease that's going to cost the taxpayer nearly $250 million. Here's the kicker. They already have a building that they're located in that is paid off.
And details on how the rivalry between Washington and Beijing extends into space. Who's winning the second space race? An expert shares details.
Beginning in 2010, notably, China and Russia both started reorganizing their air forces to incorporate and prioritize military space mission sets.
Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Before we dive into today's news, make sure to use the link down below to subscribe to our newsletter. Each week, we round up the highlights and controversies happening around China and the world, and share an exclusive behind-the-scenes snapshot with our readers. Keep an eye out. The newsletter will land in your inbox Friday morning. The U.S. government successfully brought a key player of Beijing's transnational suppression campaign to justice. In the Eastern District Court of New York, a Chinese man was sentenced for working on behalf of China to repatriate another Chinese man. Here's the catch. The defendant holds senior titles in organizations affiliated with the Chinese regime. NTD's Flora Hua was there for the proceeding.
A federal judge Wednesday sentenced An Quanzhong to 20 months in prison. According to court documents, An is part of Beijing's transnational suppression campaign known as Operation Fox Hunt. An Quanzhong showed up in court looking polished, alongside his high-profile attorney Benjamin Brafman, a top criminal defense attorney in New York. The FBI arrested An in his Long Island home 3 years ago. Before that, An kept in close contact with several Chinese officials, collaborating with them on a secret deal, forcing a Chinese national lawfully living in the U.S. to go back to China. This Chinese man is listed among the top 100 individuals wanted by China, and did exactly as Beijing asked, and hid a repatriation plot from the Justice Department. A FBI senior official said, quote, "For years, Quanzhong An threatened, harassed, and attempted to intimidate a U.S. resident and his family at China's order." He noted that the U.S. has zero tolerance for this behavior. Despite pleading guilty roughly a year ago, An Quanzhong's sentencing has not gone smoothly. Here's what happened. When the judge announced the over $1 million restitution for the harms and caused of victims of the scheme, An started arguing with his attorney in harsh whispers. An's crimes carry a maximum of 10 years in prison. The judge sentenced him to just 20 months. He's already served 7 with 13 months to go. On top of the prison time, he was ordered to pay $5 million in penalties, $1 million to the victims he targeted. This is what An told our sister media, the Epoch Times, after his sentencing. An is a U.S. permanent resident who has extensive influence in the Chinese community in New York. He owns a landmark hotel in New York's Flushing community and has investment ties in China. He also holds official titles in several organizations affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party. Those bodies collect intelligence, spread pro-Beijing propaganda, and enforce the CCP's orders overseas. They work closely with China's spy and law enforcement agencies. According to the judge, An was promised economic benefits and promotion inside Chinese Communist Party entities as reward for his actions. Operation Fox Hunt is a key part of Communist China's overseas strategy. The large-scale campaign is designed to bring individuals who are of interest to Beijing back to China to be dealt with by the Communist Party. As for the Fox's Chinese hunting, former CCP officials and executives of Chinese state-run entities, many of them fled China with sizable amounts of money that Beijing wants back. The U.S. and China do not have an extradition agreement, meaning Chinese officers have no authority to repatriate Chinese nationals. The federal court says China's transnational suppression scheme not only poses threats to Chinese nationals living in the U.S., but to U.S. national security. Flora Hua, NTD News.
The Trump administration ordered a massive funding cut for the United States Agency for Global Media. The organization oversees media outlets Voice of America and Radio Free Asia, both of which receive U.S. government funding.
Radio Free Asia is another agency seeing layoffs. Over 200 of around 300 U.S.-based employees got bad news Wednesday that they would be put on unpaid leave this week. This follows the Trump administration announcing it was canceling its funding. Radio Free Asia, known for its news broadcasting in and out of authoritarian countries like Communist China and North Korea, has been broadcasting across Asia since 1996. It was entirely dependent on federal funding. A spokesperson says they will be taking legal action against what he called the administration's unlawful decision to terminate its funding. Acting Global Media head Carrie Lake isn't sympathetic. She accused Radio Free Asia of being used as a tool for pushing a partisan narrative, calling it impossible to reform. Lake blamed insiders for working with what she called radical leftist activist groups to make the agency anti-Trump. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
The president of Radio Free Asia said the termination of its grant by the U.S. government is a boon to the Chinese Communist Party. The new special advisor to the United States Agency for Global Media, Carrie Lake, views it from a different angle. She says she's working to root out what she called waste and corruption. Here's what she had to say about a new building the agency is leasing out in Washington, D.C. for Voice of America.
I'm sitting here on the 13th floor of a shiny, brand new, beautiful skyscraper building that is costing you, the taxpayer, a fortune. The Biden administration folks who were running this agency before, right before they left office, signed a brand new lease for this building, a 15-year lease that's going to cost the taxpayer nearly $250 million. Here's the kicker. They already have a building that they're located in that is paid off.
More than 1,300 Voice of America employees were placed on leave. According to Director Michael Abramovitz, that's nearly his entire staff. Let's pivot to the space race between the U.S. and China. We welcome a guest who's been tracking the NASA crew's return mission, plus America's developments and challenges as it seeks to maintain its dominance in space. NTD's Stephanie Cox spoke to Brandon Weichert. He's the author of Winning Space: How America Remains a Superpower.
Brandon, I want to get your thoughts on yesterday's return mission. Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmore were stuck up there for about 9 months, and as you know, there's been a lot of controversy surrounding this event. What do you make of it all?
Well, this is the painful, growing pains of rebuilding America's human spaceflight capacity, which pretty much since the last moon mission, certainly since the Obama administration canceled the space shuttle program, I think in 2011 or 2012, we've been basically having to start from scratch. And clearly the Boeing example, the Starliner failure, is a great example of how allowing competition among America's space contractors, the big space contractors like Boeing, now having to compete with rising startups like SpaceX, it shows not only innovation can be had, but more importantly, it highlights the weaknesses of some of those bigger bigger space contractors, and it allows us to make adjustments so we maintain competitiveness in the long run in the new space race with China.
And I do want to dig into that aspect even more, but first up, it is early days, but so far, how do you think this administration is handling issues related to space travel, and what do you foresee it doing in the future?
Oh, well, it's night and day. I mean, the Biden administration was very similar to sort of the Chernenko regime in the Soviet Union's last days. That was sclerotic. It was, lacking a strategic purpose, and it was poorly resourced, and it really prioritized the wrong policies. In the first 2 months now, I think, that Trump has been in office, we have really started to restore our space footing. The biggest issue is going to be NASA, the bureaucracy there. We've already seen, I think it was something along the lines of 13 billion dollars was spent on DEI initiatives last 2 years ago by the Biden regime at NASA. That had serious consequences because as they were investing that money on DEI in NASA, they weren't investing it in quality control or in mission readiness for the human spaceflight program. And it's showing right now because Boeing was a victim of those DEI initiatives at NASA, and the Starliner was a failure as a result. Trump is cutting all those DEI things, and he's putting in people in charge who not only understand the space policy that we need, but they've also been up in space. Remember, the new head of NASA, Isaacson, was himself a SpaceX astronaut who went up to the Van Allen radiation belt recently for SpaceX. So we're putting real people in charge who know space.
Looking at the American companies that are succeeding, as you've pointed them out, and those that may be trailing behind, what are the main contributing factors to the U.S.'s decline and the factors for the ones that are succeeding?
Well, until Donald Trump came along in his first term, no American president since Ronald Reagan had taken space very seriously. They were constantly, OBE, overcome by events, the Middle East wars, healthcare fiascos, Great Recession, all that. So they were never focused entirely on dominating space or maintaining that lead we had coming out of the Cold War. And that gave China and Russia in particular real kind of, if you pardon the expression, space to catch up with the Americans and eventually displace us. And so those bigger companies, they're too big for their own good, and they're too close to government regulations. Whereas companies like SpaceX or some of these other startups, they are not as close to the government bureaucracy, so they have more wiggle room and they're far more innovative. They have a smaller overhead, they're more cost effective, and because of that, they're more innovative.
What are the potential consequences if America doesn't maintain its dominance in space, and what can the government and industry do to ensure that they do?
Well, the first thing that will happen is space is the ultimate high ground. Whoever controls space, the orbits around the Earth, the Earth-Moon system, they will control the Earth below. And China understands that. So that's what happens if we lose our dominance in space, which we are very close to doing, especially in regards to China. The second point is what can be done. We need to allow many more space startups to compete for government contracts. We're fighting the Chinese now, and we need to get back to that ethos. And this Starliner event proves how much hard work there is still to be done.
All right. Thanks so much for your time today, Brandon. Brandon Weichert. Always good to speak with you.
Likewise.
Coming up, the U.S. is ceding its influence to Beijing in Southeast Asia. Experts lay out potential consequences if the communist regime manages to gain control of the region.
That would make everyday Americans less secure.
A $100 billion investment in the U.S., Taiwanese chip giant TSMC's decision marking a major show of support for cutting global reliance on China. And lawmakers introduce a bill to combat China's secretive police stations on American soil. An expert breaks down what it means.
These are illegal law enforcement outposts in our country, in this case in the middle of Manhattan.
More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A hearing on Capitol Hill zeroing in on the U.S.-China power contest in Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. The region is vital to America's security, but the U.S. is losing its clout there, and Beijing is making inroads. NTD's Juliet Song has more on that.
A headache for the U.S. in the Indo-Pacific region. At a Thursday hearing on Capitol Hill, experts say if the U.S. isn't careful, it could lose its influence in Southeast Asia to China.
The United States is recognized as the leading security provider with an unmatched alliance network. But economically, China has a nearly 2-to-1 advantage on the United States in terms of trade. It is also closing the gap on investment where American companies have led.
Why does the region matter? Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands collectively make up the 5th largest economy in the world.
They occupy strategic geography straddling these key sea lanes which connect the Indian Ocean to the Western Pacific.
The region also hosts U.S. territories, including Guam, and allies such as the Philippines and Thailand allow the U.S. military access to key naval and air bases. An expert laid out how everyday Americans would be affected if China were to gain control in the region.
That would make everyday Americans poorer. That would make everyday Americans less secure. And that would also make everyday Americans also more isolated from that sort of hub of growth and opportunity.
There's also the battle between authoritarian rule and democracy.
And now imagine the most dynamic of the region of the world looking more like China than it does the United States, or for that matter, forget the United States, Australia, Japan, any of allies and partners. That is a scary thought to imagine when you think about not just security and economics, but also democracy, human rights, media freedom, and so on and so forth.
A 2024 poll shows support for the U.S. among major Southeast Asian countries has dropped sharply. Meanwhile, China has overtaken the U.S. in Southeast Asia in trade, engagement, and infrastructure development, becoming the largest trading partner of major countries like the Philippines and Indonesia. Though behind the economic levers of influence lies Beijing's military ambition. China helped upgrade the facilities in the Ream Naval Base in Cambodia. Satellite images show Chinese warships docking at the base throughout most of 2024. China has also looked at ports in Malaysia that could have military applications. Beijing pitches itself as the security partner of choice for the Pacific nations.
It's offering policing initiatives, and it's offering an alternative model, if you like, of how people can be governed.
Experts commended the U.S. for offering meaningful economic engagement with the region to help pull them away from Chinese influence. Juliet Song, NTD News.
Taiwanese chip giant TSMC is investing $100 billion in the U.S. The island's president says this move highlights the best way to break reliance on Chinese supply chains.
He made the remarks in front of Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs. TSMC is building 3 chip foundries, 2 packaging plants, and a research and development center. The company is also in the midst of a previous $65 billion investment for another 3 chip foundries. So far, 1 is operational. Taiwan's president says the investment is due to customer demand and not pressure from the Trump administration. Governor Hobbs says the project is expected to create tens of thousands of jobs.
Zooming out to the global tech sector, the world relies on Taiwanese chips, as almost all of the most advanced semiconductors are manufactured on the island. A group of Republican lawmakers in the House have illegal foreign policies in their crosshairs. They just introduced a bill to combat China's efforts to establish secretive police stations on American soil. Congresswoman Ashley Hinson sits on the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. She introduced the Expel Illegal Chinese Police Act of 2025 last week. The committee's chairman, Congressman John Molinar, co-led the bill. To discuss these latest efforts, we spoke with Jimmy Quinn, national security correspondent at the National Review. Jimmy, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you with us again. Now, first, what are these secretive Chinese police stations? What are they doing on U.S. soil?
Well, thanks for having me back. It's always great to be on NTD. What these Chinese police stations are doing is they are involved in repression. They're involved in political outreach to U.S. politicians. It's a violation of America's sovereignty. What they are, in short, are these offices that are set up within other legitimate seeming community organizations that already exist in the United States. These might be groups for, just ordinary people in the Chinese diaspora who want to get together with other people from their hometown. Many of them have been co-opted, actually, by the PRC and the Chinese Communist Party. And these people are forced to set up a police station. The claim by the Chinese government is that they're just processing paperwork, helping people with their driver's licenses. But the thing to know is that these are not approved by the U.S. government. These are illegal law enforcement outposts in our country, in this case, in the middle of Manhattan. And it's something that everyone should be wary of. So this one was shut down. There might be 2 more in the country, according to some research out there. But it's a very scary situation.
And to your point, Congressman John Molinar saying, quote, these stations represent a direct threat to our national security and undermine the rule of law in the United States. What would this legislation do in terms of combating this?
So this bill goes after the agencies and the officials within the People's Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party who are involved in this program, both here and in China. It would impose full blocking sanctions on certain officials who are involved in running the police station. Typically, it's the Ministry of Public Security, but as we learned through the federal indictment of the 2 men who operated the station in Manhattan, the Chinese consulate is involved as well here in New York. So Chinese diplomatic outposts are involved. So there's this kind of alphabet soup of different PRC security agencies, diplomatic arms that play a role in operating the police stations. What these lawmakers are trying to do is they're trying to go directly after the people who run this operation and make sure they can't enter the U.S., they can't access assets that they might have here, or conduct transactions with U.S. Individuals. That's very important. And there's also a component of the bill which bans people who are found to be operating these stations from setting foot in the United States. You have these visa bans as well.
Expanding on what you laid out, it would also empower the president to impose financial sanctions, asset freezes, and visa restrictions, among other penalties. Given the bipartisan support behind this we've seen so far, how likely are we to see this legislation become law?
I think it's very likely. So you mentioned the legislation in the House, which was introduced by Representatives Hinson and Molinar. There's a Senate version, actually, that was introduced a couple of weeks ago, or maybe it was back in January, by Senator Tom Cotton. So you have some very senior, very serious lawmakers who know a lot about the threats posed by Beijing, who are leading these efforts. You have Republican control of both chambers of Congress. And that frankly will make it a lot easier to get this through because Republicans have prioritized this. Fortunately, there is bipartisan buy-in. So in addition to, probably a majority of Republican votes, you can also expect many Democrats to support this initiative as well. So I would not be surprised to see this pass as a standalone bill or added to a future China-focused legislative package or the annual Defense Policy Act.
Very concerning indeed. Jimmy Quinn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Always great to be on.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For on-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.